And it looks as if we are live. Hello, Dr. Paul Mason. How are you doing today?
Well, thanks. Really good, Dave.
So it's the afternoon here. It's like 2 p.m. and it's what time over there in Oz?
9 o'clock in the morning. I'm in Australia now. Last time we Skyped, I was in Tokyo.
Oh, you're quite the traveler.
Holiday time, my friend.
That's true. That's true. So we're going to kind of get right to it. To catch anybody up who may not have watched before, basically last year in Gold Coast, you had done a presentation where you talked about the Feldman protocol and you were suggesting the possibility of adding carbohydrates. At the Q&A following, I mentioned that I had done an experiment that I called the added sugar experiment. And for those who are interested, it's on the cholesterolcode.com blog. However, you and I started talking a little bit more about it, and we were interested in maybe, since the prior added sugar experiment was using Skittles, which had high fructose corn syrup, wouldn't it be interesting if we could try dextrose directly, right? So what I'm about to show you is it was originally going to just be like a few slides, but this practically turned into a presentation. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, for the viewers and for you.
I can't wait to see what you're going to show. I'm excited.
I even got the title page going on here. Look at that. All right. So to recap, this is what the prior one was, and it had originally meant to only be one intervention, but it ended up being two, which is that I had a fatty meal, and then it was followed by Skittles, and then I had Skittles, and I had a fatty meal. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but that's the only version in which I did a net addition of carbohydrates and particularly of sugar. Otherwise, my phase 2 had more to do with swapping, isocaloric swapping out of fat and bringing in carbs.
Yeah.
And that one kind of had a schedule. This is sort of what the schedule looked like. But now let's go ahead and get into this one, which is what we kind of talked about and designed together. And effectively, this is what we landed on, which is that there was going to be a baseline diet, which happens to be identical to the same baseline diet I'd done recently with the resistance training experiment. So we kind of had something to compare it with. And you can see kind of what the breakdown is. It's 2,204 calories. Fat is 178 grams. Protein is 133, basically, with 4 carbs. So definitely a ketogenic diet, right?
Probably, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
So the baseline plus the dextrose, per what you were talking about, because we were kind of weighing just about how much, you were looking for around 225 grams a day, which we broke out to 75 grams per meal. And this is what that'll look like. So, whoops.
Now, let's just make one point too.
Oh, go ahead.
275 grams a day of carbohydrates or 225 is not a lot of carbohydrate.
Right.
A lot of people will consume that in one meal.
Right. That's true. So this is what the baseline diet looks like for anybody who's interested. And to further reduce confounders, I always try to even eat at the same times. So it lands at about 10 a.m., 3 p.m., and 8 p.m. It's intentionally meant to be a 10-hour window because it's about the maximum I could stretch it while still having about a 14-hour fasted period. I don't want to actually have it in a smaller number than that, less hours, because I actually want it to, as best as I can, mimic what a typical person would be doing. So a 10-hour feeding window is pretty common. So then what do we add? We add bottle caps, which, as you can see, well, actually you can't see. I don't have the ingredients in here, but its sweetener is dextrose, pretty much. And if you do the math on it, one serving is 13 pieces, and it turns out 70 pieces is 75 grams of carbs. Therefore, 3 meals times 75 grams, we get our 225 grams a day. Okay, so then we see the same thing, except now I end up having the fatty meal, and then shortly after, I go ahead and have the dextrose in the form of the bottle caps.
Right, okay.
So before we get to the lipids, let's talk about what went on with my CGM, my continuous glucose monitor. This is what my baseline was before adding the dextrose. So as I was just mentioning, we had 5 days in which I was consuming the baseline diet, this is what my glucose looks like on the baseline diet.
This is what my patients aspire to.
Yes. Well, check this out.
This is a flat line.
We even have here, whoops, sorry. Next one we even have here, this is the highest that my glucose had gone in the day. It's 105 milligrams per deciliter, right? I'll be counting on you, by the way, to help me do some conversion to the millimoles. You know how we are, us Americans. We get kind of stuck in
because let's be fair, we're not both speaking the Queen's English here, are we?
True. Okay, so I even tweeted out a kind of semi-joking, well, goodbye, straight line, knowing that I was about to enter this experiment, right? So naturally, I kept a close eye on what was going to happen with my CGM. This is what followed in the very first meal after being carnivore for 28 days and for having done this up to this point. We spiked up to 220.
That's no longer a flat line.
What's that? No, that's not a flat line anymore. And then we had a huge bottoming out. I had never seen a hypoglycemic follow-up yet. Even on the white bread and processed meat experiment, I had never seen a dip down this low.
The overshoot.
I even, this is so bad, but I even had to, as I was watching this happen, I was lying next to my wife in bed. I said, it's probably not going to happen, honey, but I need to talk you through a scenario.
If I fall into a hypoglycemic coma.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to try to get me some kind of juice or some kind of, anyway, it was a very uncomfortable conversation because you have to understand, my wife puts up with so much stuff, and here I am telling her I've just now initiated something for which I may actually lose my marbles.
So can I just describe something to you for the moment, just on this graph here?
Okay.
This is something that I've covered in one of my lectures, where when we see this dip, once you enter the phase of hypoglycemia, and because you've stopped your body from burning fats, you've stopped this fat oxidation, your body is starving. So you'll have symptoms of, you'll be headaches, you'll be tremulous, you'll shake, you'll be sweaty,
right?
You'll feel nauseous, and the overwhelming sense of a lot of people is that they just feel hungry. And if this is your response to sugar, if you were having a standard breakfast, of sugar sweetened cereal with a fruit juice or something like that, your blood sugars would be crashing a couple of hours later. That drives the hunger process, and you end up eating again. And a lot of people will end up on this continual cycle of eating, and the only way they can avoid feeling lousy is just by stuffing themselves full of sugar and carbs every 2 or 3 hours.
Yep. Well, and for what it's worth, that's the thing you described is what was giving me comfort. Was I wasn't feeling shaky, I wasn't feeling lightheaded, I wasn't and of course, as the neat thing about having a CGM is you can see at the very tail end over there, I've got it's starting to level off.
Yeah.
Had I been getting into the 40s, I might have aborted and went ahead and started downing something with some sugar. But regardless, I wasn't too worried. I just needed to prepare my wife just on the possibility. Now let's go a little bit further. We're still on the first day. How am I looking at 10:13 p.m. at night after the third meal, the last meal? I'm flying high at 255 milligrams per deciliter.
Now what on God's green earth has gone on?
Well, I'm gonna level with you. At 3 different points in the course of this first day, I genuinely thought about canceling the experiment. And this was one of the biggest mulling points. I was really thinking about reaching out to you and going, Paul, just don't know, man. Even if this is okay, I don't know that I can be at peace enough with it that I couldn't count on my own hormonal response, right? So I'm raising my own cortisol levels trying to deal with this. So anyway, I had to think on it, as you guys would say. And ultimately, I decided I was going to go ahead and give it another day and really try to just put myself at peace with it, right? But bear in mind, these numbers truly are like I've only seen numbers like this. Actually, I don't think I've ever seen a 255. I think the highest I've seen my glucometer, my continuous glucose monitor get was while I was doing the white bread and processed meat experiment, and I think it just barely topped over 200. I don't think I've ever seen like a 255 or anything like that. So
yeah, that is concerning.
It is concerning. Yeah, this is what it ended up looking like over the course of that first day. So you can see the little fork and knives down here. That's the actual point in which I had not the meal, but in particular the addition of the dextrose, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to go a little bit.
The thing is, even after you have that bolus of dextrose, your body has a real big trouble in regulating the glucose. It doesn't even flatline after those periods. And I think for type 1 diabetics watching this, who have heard of Dr. Bernstein, he talks about bigger inputs means bigger errors. You put this load of stuff in your body undershoots it, overshoots it, just can't get things right.
Right. Now, this is where it does get interesting, because past this day, you're going to see a graph similar to what I'm about to show you, which is this is the 4th day.
Yeah.
And really this one, really before this, they're more acute humps. This one ends up going a little bit longer because in both the first and the second, the breakfast and in the dinner, I ended up eating the candies slower. So the longer tail in the decline probably makes a little more sense in that regard, because it wasn't like I downed the 75 grams all at once. It kind of stretched out over like probably an hour maybe, because I was really sick of it by this point, by this last day. So it was a little bit tough for me to kind of bring it all the way down. But I circle up here the 231 because many people are going to be watching this are going to wonder this, and I certainly was, which is, okay, if you've carb loaded, if you will, for 3 days, what peak could you expect? Because you would assume it'd be lower, because a lot of people, that's what they do in order to beat the OGTT test, right? Is that they have a lot more carbs in the days before having one.
No, so but that actually can go both ways, Dave. That can go both ways, because if you're strictly carb restricting before this, you can create a glycogen deficit within some of your muscles and your liver, and that can act as a sink for the glucose. So occasionally what we see is that after the first 1 or 2 glucose boluses, that there's very little rise, and when people are glycogen replete, as in their stores are full, that's when we see the impact on the bloodstream. So what we're looking at here is wondering, the benefit of carb loading is that it just restores the pancreatic insulin secretion function back to normal. And it's a little bit complex, but we release insulin in 2 ways. We have a bolus release, and then we have a continual secretion. And the bolus release is the pancreas sort of says, okay, I've preformed some insulin here, and it's ready to punch out.
It's the stage 1, right? It's the stage 1 release, what they typically refer to it as.
So early on, we see that your bolus release looks like it's going quite well, but the tail end of that is all over the shop, and it suggests that the insulin production itself is probably a little bit, not what it used to be, because you've been low carb for a while.
But we have one challenging confounder with day 1 that I have to acknowledge, which is my own awareness from the CGM. I was noticeably to myself stressed as I approached that second meal. I was really genuinely worried, and it frustrated me, because I was like, if I'm concerned and I'm reacting to that, that's not a good thing for the data. I want clean data, right?
No, cortisol, right? Adrenaline, the stress hormones.
And you've got all kinds of issues that can come up with that. So I don't know for sure how much that second meal and its tail would be related to my own anxiety at that time, versus how much of it might have actually been just adjusting during that period. past that point, there really wasn't anything like that there was in the first day. And maybe it's coincidental that I'd gotten more comfortable, not really comfortable, I would say, but more comfortable than I was on the first day when it happened.
Yeah, I mean, sure, as long as you don't mind your glucose going over 200 every so often, 3 times a day.
I do mind, but I knew it was a 4-day experiment, so I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and go with it. But I'll say this, man, it's yet one more. It is one more. Let me just. All CGM manufacturers, I'm going to give you lots of free advertising. CGMs are just amazing. They're amazing. And I wish more patients, particularly people who suspect that they may have issues, would consider having one, even if it's just for like a few weeks, right? Like
90% of my patients get one.
That's, yeah, I feel like it's just a no-brainer is no-brainer. So anyway, just
no hiding. If your sugars are bad, they're bad.
Yeah. Well, and you'll even if you have good control of your sugar, you'll quickly find out what meals are activating it the most. You'll find out more about where the timing makes a difference as to when you eat. You'll find out one of my favorite things is you'll find out how soon you go to bed after you eat matters for how long your glucose remains elevated into your sleep, which matters, right, for your circadian rhythm and so forth. So anyway, I just think that's all great. Okay, so of course I took lipids primarily with a cardio check. I have 2 side-by-side displays, and if you're brand new to my research, then these displays will already freak you out because you can't even believe that I'm showing numbers comparable to somebody with familial hypercholesterolemia. But we'll save that for another time. Let's go ahead and get into the data. I'm just going to have to do
some quick calculations here, Dave, because these units, I'm an Antipodean, remember?
Sorry, say that again?
I'm an Antipodian. I just need to convert the units.
Oh, right, of course. Let me back up a step. So this was just sort of a random sampling of a couple that I had that I think were probably early on, and it shows. So let's see, an LDL of 296 for you would be about 3 times what they would consider optimal, which I want to say, yeah, you may need to convert it. I'm not actually sure.
That's all right.
But an LDL of around 300, you'll see, was fairly common in the 12-hour fasted LDL of the baseline. So I'm not showing yet what happened. I'm showing only the bars leading up to the intervention, right? So we've got like it's 293, 316, 308. These are, again, 300 is about 3 times what they would consider to be optimal levels that you want to be at or less. Okay, are you ready? You ready for the big moment? Here we go.
Please, I'm sweating here.
All right. Boom. we
have a very, very modest, if anything. It's pretty stable, but they trend down.
Yes, it trends down. I will concede I wasn't super excited. I'm probably more excited that at least was different from added sugar experiment 1. It does at least give us a little bit of a hint that perhaps it really did make a difference relative to the Skittles. But that said, compared to a lot of the other drop protocols, not even just the Feldman protocol, but for example, the isochloric swap, it doesn't quite have the same oomph, I guess you could say. It doesn't have quite the same downward trend. I was even going to if I had time, I was going to throw those in for some comparison. But that said, we have one other possible confounder. This is what happened to my weight over the same time. So you can see that I mainly stayed pretty much between 188 and a half-ish to 190 maybe, right? And then boom, yeah. This is the first full day that I had been having the sugar, the dextrose, then the next day, and the next day, and then the next day. So when we take that into account and we put that up at a graph, the brown line is where the intervention is, right?
Yeah.
You can see my weight precipitously going up, unfortunately, may be a reason why the slightly downward trend on the LDL. And to present you some evidence of my own on that, actually, because this just happened to happen when I did the weight gain experiment. So comparing this to the weight gain experiment, this is what happened on that experiment. On 5/7, right about here, on 5/7 is when I switched from the standard American diet over to the keto diet. And you can see that the weight starts going down and the LDL starts going up. And the thing is, this is actually a relative comparison. So this delta you'll see in the next graph is massive. The LDL went from 133 to 228 in a span of about 5 pounds of difference. That was a major.
Now, obviously, we have to be careful. Correlation not being causation. Obviously, we have to be careful. Correlation not being causation and all that.
Of course, absolutely.
However,
but that said, look at this correlation. We got like a Pearson of negative 0.936. If I flip the axes on the left side,
that's really tight.
Yeah, it's incredibly tight. That was a real watershed moment for me in the research, because while we always ask out loud, there seems to be some anecdotal evidence here and there where people, when they lose weight, they seem to see their LDL go up. When I saw that with my own weight gain and weight loss experiment, again, me being me, I kept all the other variables exactly the same. I ate exactly the same at the end of the standard American diet, and then flipped to the ketogenic diet, and it was the baseline diet at that time. So I was eating the same way and at the same times and blah, blah, blah. So that we knew the only major variable that was changing, was the weight loss. And granted, a good chunk of that had to have been water, right? But that said, I mean, that correlation is so tight that past that point, when people would come out to us and they would go, yeah, I'm still losing weight, but what about this lipid panel? More and more I've been like, let's wait till you're weight stable. So if you're not weight stable, I'm sorry, it's really hard to make an assessment knowing what we already know now with this difference. It's just so striking, right?
Yeah, look, I can't fault anything you say there, but probably just to add to it, with regards to it being only a modest drop in the LDL, the original protocol that we were designing was for 7 days.
True.
And we had good reason for making it a little bit longer.
You may have to get somebody else for that one.
But I mean, look, to be fair, I mean, trying to fit it into your schedule, and I guess your want for self-preservation, which, to be honest, is Darwinian and to be respected. I wouldn't do 4 days myself. I'll be fair.
I will concede this. If it was, let's say that my glucose was even climbing to the levels that was the white bread experiment, that was already what I thought at that time was something I would never do again. Like that was a total of 11 days. And I even didn't really complete the experiment as designed, because I was going to be maxing out at like a loaf and a half of white bread a day. And in observing my glucose getting and staying up there in like the 180-ish realm, the 170 realm, I was like, and I mean, Paul, you and I both know it's not the same thing as like I'm, clearly stabbing myself with razor blades. It very well could be that this is just physiologically fine. There's no real, risk involved, whatever. But all of that said, we don't know that for sure, right?
I disagree.
Yeah.
Whenever your blood sugar is elevated, you're doing damage to your body.
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way: to recoverable damage, or to what degree it's, am I really shortening my life?
It's recoverable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my point is, we don't know how much is truly recoverable. We don't know how much of it is truly, we don't know how much is like putting me at risk in some other way. A lot of this is still in the unknown. And while obviously I feel like it's low enough risk that I'm willing to do a lot of these experiments, I do have to find kind of my own comfort level. And I will concede this one really pushed me. Like if I were to pick a list of top 3 experiments that made me uncomfortable, this one makes that list. No question, right?
Well, because you've got direct evidence of bad stuff.
Exactly. Like it really would have helped me out to not have a CGM during this experiment. Yeah,
the data.
Yeah, although I don't know, if I had tested my blood before I went to bed and I saw that it was like 250, I might have canceled the experiment right there. I might have been like, oh, whoa, who knows how long it's been hovering up at these levels, right? All of that's still possible. So,
well, let's just talk for a moment just about the reasons why prolonging the experiment, the theory behind how that leads to an increased drop in LDL and why the 4 days might not have been quite long enough.
Sure. Go ahead.
So the first talked about at length, personally, release of insulin. And as you saw, just from the shape of the CGM, that early on and later on, you had a very different level of sugar control, which infers a very different release of insulin. So it's just a matter of training the pancreas, if you will. And the second part is that what actually happens on exposure to insulin is that that's part of the pathway that leads to upregulation of these LDL receptors on the liver, which actually the LDL out of circulation instantly. Have you still got me there? It looks like we're on a bit of a go slow.
Yeah, you've been kind of chopping up a bit. I'm hoping it's coming through for the viewers. For me, it was sort of like chucking around a little. So I don't know if it's just sort of a bandwidth thing, but hopefully your explanation came through. But to what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think I'm going to just try that.
Say again, Paul. Oh, I'm worried we're losing Paul. I hope we're not.
Yeah, I might just go through that again because I think it's not even registering on my end, so I think it's not coming through.
Sure, no, go ahead.
I'm worried. Okay, so let's try that again. So in essence, we need to train the pancreas, and we need to wait long enough for the LDL receptors to be made by the liver.
Right. Now, how long does it take for the liver to make?
We're a bit scratchy here still, aren't we? We're conferencing from Australia, which is a nation with a third world.
Paul, just to help on the bandwidth, go ahead and turn off your camera. It's in the top middle bar.
Well, the research is unclear, but I anticipate probably about 3 days.
About 3 days? Yeah. No, 3 days would make a lot of sense to me personally. So I wouldn't be surprised by that at all, for sure. Yeah, I think that will probably help on your bandwidth if you're turned off there. And actually, oh, Paul, I think you may have turned off your mic as well. Just turn off the camera. Make sure your microphone is still on. So there should be like a red on your camera. That sounded like you might have had your microphone on.
So?
Yeah, you there? Oh, I'm worried.
You're muffled and underwater.
No, there you are. There you are. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, let's go with this for a moment.
Okay, go ahead.
So now, okay, so yeah, so the delay in receptor synthesis and the delay in I'm just my computer's coming up here with a bit of a hissy fit. So can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. You actually sound great.
Great. Sorry about that. So then, in a nutshell, performing the experiment for longer is likely to lead to more dramatic results than the modest reduction we saw.
And for what it's worth, because my added sugar intervention in the prior added sugar experiment was 3 days capped for both of it, that's very possible because I've never had it extended to this period of time. In fact, this is the first time I've done it for 4 days. So you may be right.
So it could have been if we had squeaked in another couple of days, we might have seen something more resounding.
True, it's possible.
But you're not volunteering, I see.
I'm not anxious to jump in the fray. It's sort of funny. The scientist in me was sort of looking at the time, and it's like 2:30, so my 3 p.m. feeding would be like in 30 minutes if I were like still on the experiment. But what you're talking about now is an added 3 days, like not even just one more day. And
well, let's reframe it. It's not an added 3 days. It's that 3 days which you opted out of in the first place. I'm not trying to pressure you at all day, and I certainly wouldn't take medical advice.
No, you guys witnessed it. I've got 105 viewers right now who witnessed Paul. You've given me medical advice. So if I go back on the experiment and then I keel over tomorrow,
can I please get your PlayStation?
No, it is an interesting theory. A part of why I wanted to go at least 4 days was because I was thinking the same thing you were, that we would probably be able to see at least the production of the LDL receptors. Here's the problem. The problem is I don't know how I could continue doing this without continuing to gain weight, and the gaining of the weight brings about a different front as to why there could be the reduction of the LDL. You see the issue? Because I believe that the weight gain could drop down the LDL, and I've already observed it, not just even in my own data, but in other people's data. And likewise, it doesn't necessarily have a huge effect on the way up. It can have a huge effect on the way down. But on the way up, because I know it can already be a marginal effect, I would need to pull off consuming the same number of calories and the same number of dextrose and so forth without gaining weight. And the only way I can do that is to add some kind of exercise or something like that, but that impacts my
severely restrict your other macros, which is, that in itself, once you start restricting the other macros, that puts you in a world of hurt. That is not healthy.
Well, and I've already done isocaloric experiments. I already know that works. That may be, and we can chat a little bit more about that later, but this is why I think the added sugar experiment, unless we actually add less sugar, there's the risk that I just gain more weight. If I gain more weight, there's no, like the problem is, like, if I could feel very surefire that we see the LDL go down more in a few days, and then we could feel confident that it was in fact your theory, that would work great. I just don't know what to do about the weight part. I don't know how I can keep from gaining weight.
And I'm not going to suggest lipo.
But lipo? You've got all kinds of interesting medical advice on this broadcast, Paul. That's pretty funny. So no, I think for now, I mean, I kind of drew up just this little bit of a conclusion thing. Basically, yes, the LDL appears to have fallen with the intervention, which is good. I mean, if in effect we can say this experiment was a success, even if a marginal one, it was a success. Win is a win. It did drop down. However, some portion of the LDL drop may be due to weight gain. Right. And we didn't get into it, but there's many things about this experiment that was challenging. I should go ahead and just mention what the biggest confounder is, Paul, which is literally the very next morning after the first day, I had, without giving it TMI, we'll call it a traffic jam. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right.
I didn't even know that was possible, that could happen in a 24-hour period of time that quickly. And make no mistake, it was not something else. Let me put it this way. The odds are extremely low that'd be something else, because I had just eaten no sugar and I was all carnivore for 28 days before that. And for the baseline, I was having exactly the same food, the same 10 a.m., 3 p.m.
No issues in that preceding 28 days.
What's that?
And no issues in the preceding 28 days.
Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. Heck, you were the one who actually had a presentation that I liked that talked about when people went on the no fiber diet. Remember that? And you had the graph and you said, Don't worry, I didn't forget anything that's at the end of this graph. And it's all the people who are on the no fiber who had like 0 GI issues or any of the, the other stuff, right? Do you remember that presentation? Did I lose you, Paul? I'm worried I lost Paul because I don't hear him right now. Okay, well, anyway, Paul has a great presentation on that where he actually presents people who went on the no fiber diet. I think there was quartiles. I think there were 4 different types that were doing it. Anyway, that was what I was going to say to Paul, was that there is one confounder potentially in that I didn't mention yet, that I had magnesium citrate on that day, on day 2, to resolve the issue. And it might have just been a straight up magnesium deficiency. I'm not sure. But it did ultimately resolve everything that needed to be resolved. So I'm concerned we may have lost Paul because I don't see any levels and he seems to be kind of frozen. So I think this is probably a good place to wrap anyway. I think it was a very interesting experiment, and there's actually quite a lot that I haven't put in here. Like I said, and actually as I kind of left it here in this final thing, there are many things, that third bullet point, there are many things about this experiment that were challenging. More on that is going to be coming in the write-up, or I may even save it for the presentation. I'm not sure yet. But if I do, then I'll definitely be telling you all about it by March, because it was just really a lot of interesting aspects to how this experiment unfolded that made me realize just why I really don't want to do an added sugar experiment again if I can help it. Anyway, I hope you guys all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll catch up with you again later.